Greetings and welcome to Bible Prophecy Made Simple. I'm your host, Andrew Smith. In this video, we're going to be doing a preparation for our verse by verse study of the book of Revelation. And what we're going to do in this video is update our end time prophecy timeline with more information that is going to bridge our understanding of Daniel and Revelation so we can see how they're connected and really produce one narrative. And we'll see how this bridge between Daniel and Revelation provides a cohesive and biblical understanding of the book of Revelation with Daniel as the foundation, so that you have a solid biblical understanding and that you are not deceived, because there's a lot of information out in the world of Christendom about the book of Revelation that is simply not accurate. And if you go through this video and you study the verses that I share in this video, you can see that for yourself, and so that you will not be deceived. Because again, that's the first warning we get with regard to end time events, is to take heed. That means be diligent. That means you have to be assertive, you have to be aggressive, you have to take the initiative to not be deceived. And prayerfully, this video will help you in that effort. So let's get started. So this is somewhat of a review of the timeline we've done in the past. Again, I've shown this chart in the past, but again, we're going to go through it just in a review format, but providing more information towards the end so you can see how everything ties together between the books of Daniel and Revelation. So as a review, we started with the kingdom of Babylon, and this goes back to Daniel chapter 2, when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream, and he insisted that his wise men tell him both the dream and the interpretation so that he can know that their interpretation of the dream was accurate. And what the dream revealed was a statue that was representing a timeline of events through world kingdoms, and that Daniel 2 provided that framework, and then Daniel 7, 8, to some extent 9, and then 10, 11, and 12 all fill in that framework with information. And then now, it sets the foundation for Revelation to pick up and build on that foundation and complete that whole narrative. And that's what we're going to see. But again, this whole timeline began in the kingdom of Babylon, where Babylon is represented by this head of gold, and later in Daniel 7, represented as a lion with eagle's wings. That takes us to the next kingdom of Media Persia, was represented in Nebuchadnezzar's vision as the chest and arms of silver. But in Daniel's vision, which echoes Nebuchadnezzar's but adds more information, Daniel sees a bear raised on one side and has the 3 ribs in his mouth. And then Daniel 8, you'll see the same kingdom, Media Persia, represented as a ram with 2 horns. And it clearly says that this represents the kingdoms of Media and Persia. Again, history supports this, but Greece was the kingdom that took over from Media Persia. And just to remind you that this was all foretold in advance, and is one of the reasons why we can trust Bible prophecy, because everything in the past has already been fulfilled that was to be fulfilled in its time, so that we can have confidence to know that what it says about the future will take place as well. So of course, again, in Daniel 7, the kingdom of Greece is represented by the leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. And then in Daniel 8, it's the goat with the 1 notable horn. We know from history that that notable horn was Alexander, as he conquered the world at that time. That takes us to the next kingdom. Of course, we know from history that Rome took over control of the empire from Greece. It was represented in Daniel 2 as the legs of iron. and in Daniel 7 as the beast with 10 horns, that nondescript beast. And in Daniel 8, it's represented as the transgressors. And you see that word specifically in the King James Version, but it's representing the imperial pagan aspects of Rome. And that then transitions to spiritual Rome. And we have the dates. 1798 is when spiritual Rome received a deadly wound. That deadly wound was, in fact, the separation of church and state when Napoleon's forces took Pope Pius VI hostage and ended the papacy's rule over the monarchs and monarchies of Europe. And in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, is represented as this feat of iron and clay, that mixture that really represents fornication in the sense of it's an unlawful union, this mixture of iron and clay. And then in Daniel 7, it's represented as the little horn. Same thing in Daniel 8, in Daniel's second vision. And in Daniel 9, verse 27, it's referred to as the desolate. I have a whole video on Daniel 9, verses 24 to 27 to show the distinction in the pronouns that are used in that verse to give you the accurate understanding of who's being represented. And I just pointing out that the desolate in Daniel 9:27 is in fact spiritual Rome that will have a resurgence at the end of time to resume the things that it did in the past. So moving on from there, again, as part of the Daniel study, we looked at the dynamic between the king of the north and the king of the south, how it started in the Greek Empire with the Seleucid dynasty in the north and the Ptolemaic dynasty in the south of the Greek Empire. They would then transition. Daniel 11 points this out, and we looked at this. The king of the north would transition to imperial Rome. The king of the south was essentially in Egypt. The ideology in Egypt is, who is the Lord that I should obey him? So what comes out of Egypt is the ideology of atheism. And then the king of the north would transition to the papacy, and the king of the south would ultimately manifest in our modern day as atheism. And that takes us up to, and I have down here the 5 kings and kingdoms as fallen in Revelation 17:10. We'll touch on that when we get to Revelation 17, but I just want to emphasize that these are the 5 kingdoms that have fallen. And then you have this spiritual king of the south that would arise after the year 1844. That's the time of the end. That's when the sanctuary would be cleansed. That means the Most High's people would begin being cleansed at that time in preparation for his 144,000 that would represent him in the last days. That 144,000 again being a symbolic number. So the king of the south, this is in Revelation 17:10, the kingdom that is at the time that John is seeing this vision. It's the kingdom that pushes at the king of the north in the time of the end. Again, 1844 representing the time of the end. And that's when the ideology of atheism would really take root in the world and become a part of everyday life and society as we see it now. And so the question is, when will that time end? Because the next thing to come on the scene, and this is where we start, and I just want to back up. Daniel's detail doesn't cover a lot of what happens after this. Okay. That's why we have the book of Revelation, to continue the narrative and add more color. What happens, and I mentioned the sealing of the 144,000 in the time of the end, but what happens immediately after that is where Revelation picks up the story, because it references this false prophet. And this false prophet would be on the scene a short space, I guess, relatively speaking. This is that lamb-like beast that has 2 horns that speaks like a dragon. So it looks Christian, if you will, but it speaks satanic. And this is the element of this false prophet. I have my opinions on who this false prophet represents. In the context that John was seeing this vision, this entity had not come yet. So again, this is a future from where we are now, a future time from where we are now. But again, it's going to continue just a short space relative to all these time frames that you see already. And this is the entity that is going to set up the image to the beast and bring back the church and state union. My thoughts on this false prophet is that it actually represents Christendom, because Christendom is not biblical. Christendom does not follow the Bible. Christendom has been used to control, to kill, to enslave. Everything opposite of what the Bible teaches is what Christendom does. And I believe that I'm not talking about the average everyday person that goes to church. I'm talking about an ideology. And I think most specifically, the element of Christendom that this false prophet represents is white Christian nationalism. Again, I'm not speaking of everyone that goes to church and calls himself Christian. Remember, there's deception rampant in the world right now. And a lot of it is coming from the world of Christendom, which I believe represents this false prophet that is going to set up the image to the beast. Again, it looks lamb-like, it looks Christ-like, but it speaks like a dragon, and the dragon, Revelation 12, verse 9, is Satan. Now, once this image is set up, remember, spiritual Rome received the deadly wound in 1798. The activity of this false prophet is what brings this entity back on the scene. But it comes back on the scene, and Revelation refers to it as Antichrist, and it's going to rule for a period of 42 months, and that's 3.5 years. And in the secular world, you might hear terms like New World Order. Well, this kingdom here is the eighth kingdom. Revelation 17:11 says it's the eighth kingdom, and it's of the seven. So here are the seven: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Remember, this entity fell in 1798, but false prophet is going to prop it back up, and it will be the eighth kingdom. But again, it's of the seven, so it's of one of these, and it's this one in particular, number 5, the spiritual Rome. It's the beast that ascends from the bottomless pit. We're going to see that in Revelation chapter 11, verse 7. This is when the deadly wound will be healed, because the deadly wound was inflicted in 1798, but this deadly wound will be healed, and this entity will be back in power. It's going to promise peace and safety, and it rules by pharmakia, which is spiritualism, or you can look at it in the fact that it could be medicinal. So that I just thought that was very interesting, that the word sorceries that's translated in the King James Version is the word pharmakia in the Greek. Now, amidst this time, we'll have this loud cry, which is the tidings from the east and the north that we read about in Daniel 11:44. This is the three angels' messages, as told in Revelation 14, verses 6 to 12, and also in Revelation 18, verses 1 through 5 and beyond. This is the final warning to the world to worship the Creator and to flee Babylon and all of its errors. The word Babylon means confusion. Now, Revelation 17 says that this system is Mystery Babylon is the mother of harlots. So this system that sits on top has offspring. All right. So you have this system of spiritual Rome, but its offspring are all the errant churches of Christendom. And this is the system that Revelation 14 and Revelation 18 is calling us out of. And I want to emphasize that Matthew 24, verse 14 refers to it as this gospel. And that's something we're going to take a look at here in a moment, because where it says this gospel will be preached to all the world as a witness, and then the end will come, it's referring to Revelation 14 and 18, or the three angels' messages. Revelation 18 is not a fourth angel. It's an echo of what we read in Revelation 14. So next thing to happen is the enforcement of the mark of the beast, or at least what will lead up to it. And that's in Revelation 17. We see the 10 kings of the world give their power and strength to the beast, and they have one mind. That's that one world religio-political government. And their one mind is to make war with the Lamb, to make war with true, I don't even want to use the word Christian, but Bible believers, true truth seekers, those who study for themselves, that aren't following or any cult or anything like that. Those who are serious about their walk with the Most High will be the enemies of this system. This entity receives worship, and it directs worship to the dragon. Again, the dragon being Satan. It makes war with the saints of the Most High God. We'll see that in verses 5 through 8 of Revelation 13. And it makes war against the two witnesses we see in Revelation 11. What we're going to see in Revelation 11 is that these two witnesses are none other than the Old and New Testaments, the complete word of the Most High God. And that's who this system is going to be opposed to and make war with. And that's when the mark of the beast will be enforced. And we'll talk more about that when we get in the book of Revelation. And the sealing of the 144,000 is taking us up to that time, so that the Most High's people are prepared when that time comes. And following that, you have the 7 last plagues, all represented in these verses. And we're going to take a look at that, more of that here in a moment. Then we have the second coming of Christ. We see the verses here. And then following that is 1,000 years of judgment, and final judgment in hellfire, and restoration and peace, which we can hopefully all be looking forward to. And we see that in those verses there. But what I want to touch on now is how, and this last part is just to show how this covers the 2,300 years from 457 to 1844. That's the Marae we looked at in Daniel 9, verse 27. And then the cleansing of the sanctuary would take place. And then the little horn would be broken without hand. And that's final judgment. So this is just showing how the Chazon spans from the year 457 all the way essentially through to final judgment. So what we're going to look at now is the bridge between these two elements of this narrative to make it one cohesive narrative, and that's Matthew 24. And we're going to see in verses 1 through 31 how this all plays out. So in verses 1 through 3, Messiah's disciples ask, what will be the signs of your coming, right? And the first thing he tells them is to avoid deception, because there's going to be many false Christs that come, right? Coming in, essentially many false Christians, if you will, that are going to be teaching some version, their version of the word, just essentially to make money is what it's going to boil down to. But the spiritual deception is what's dangerous for us. I mean, whether you give up your money or not, that's one thing. But to be spiritually deceived is a bigger concern. Verse 6, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. We're certainly experiencing that now. And what I'm emphasizing with this chart is that the narrative of Matthew 24 starts in 1844 and extends all the way through the second coming. Okay. And so the things that we're experiencing now are these things: wars, rumors of wars. And then what's important to know, that this is not the end, right? So you can be looking around at the news right now and towards the end of 2025 and thinking, wow, the end must be near with all this worldwide conflict that's going on. But that's not the case. There's more to come. Verses 7 and 8 talk about nation versus nation. That word nation is the Greek ethnos, and it's where we get the word ethnicity. So this is racial conflict that we're going to see more of. And then kingdom versus kingdom, of course, that's your actual countries, famine, pestilences, your COVIDs, and whatever else, earthquakes, and all these things in diverse places. So, all around the world, we're going to be seeing a lot of this activity increase and increase. And that's when we can start to expect the end to start being on the horizon, so to speak. Verses 9 through 13, I found interesting because it says there would be essentially religious persecution, would be persecuted for Christ's name's sake. And many will be offended. And that means they're going to be turned away from the truth and caused to backslide. And that just reminds me of 2 Timothy chapter 4, starting in verse 1, it says, I charge thee therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears, and they shall turn their ears away from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. So it's in this context that many will be caused to backslide because they won't love the truth. And then again, it says false prophets arise and will deceive many. I believe will contribute to this backsliding. And because of lawlessness, the love of many will wax cold. I just found it interesting that this word cold is the Greek word psycho. And it says, and those who shall endure will be saved. And it's the same thing that Paul says here in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5, where he says, but watch thou in all things endure afflictions. So there's going to be widespread religious persecution against those who follow the truth, but there will be a lot of, again, false prophets and many people turning others or turning those who would be on the proper walk away from the truth. And we're seeing all that in verses 9 through 13. So I believe that it's this false prophet that is going to contribute to this widespread falling away. Now, this takes us to verse 14, where it says, again, this gospel will be preached to all the world as a witness. That, again, being the loud cry, that three angels' messages that goes to the world to worship the Creator, that Babylon is fallen, and to flee Babylon so that you don't receive the mark of the beast. And verses 15 through 20 now take us to the end of this particular narrative, again, bridging the gap between Daniel and Revelation. Because in verse 15, it says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel standing in the holy place, then it's time to flee. I think it's Mark that says he's standing where he ought not be. So this again is the resurgence of papal Rome to resume its authority as leader of the spiritual world. And that's where it says, that time head to the hills. Woe unto them who are nursing, and pray that your flight not be on the Sabbath. All these things in Matthew 24 is when essentially it's time to flee the cities, head to the hills, because there's going to be widespread chaos where the majority of people are. And right after that is the Great Tribulation, something that has never happened before, right? Daniel 12 says the same thing, but it refers to it as a time of trouble that had never happened before and will not happen again. It's the same reference, okay? But this Great Tribulation is when the elect are protected. It says the time would be shortened for the elect's sake. We don't know how long this time frame is going to be, but I believe it's a period of 7 because it's the same time frame as the 7 last plagues. And one could argue that it would be either 7 days or 7 years. Now, the reason I say that is Christ says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. In the days of Noah, Noah's family was in the ark for 7 days before flood came or judgment was rained down, no pun intended. But when it comes to Bible prophecy, we can extrapolate a day for a year. And only reason I believe it's potentially 7 years is because there's a period of 5 months in there in that seven last plagues that would obviously extend it long beyond 7 days. So I believe the 7 days that Noah and his family were in the ark are types or is typology of the elect being protected for 7 years during the seven last plagues. And maybe that's where some of the confusion comes, where a lot of people take the 70th week of Daniel 9:24 to 27, and they put that at the end of time. Maybe that's where they get that from. But that 70th week is already passed. I've shown that in a different video. But point I'm making here is that whatever the time frame, the elect will be protected. And that's something that we can take comfort in. Immediately following that is the second coming of the Messiah. And that's when the elect are gathered from the four corners of the earth. And that essentially completes the narrative of Matthew 24, where it bridges us from the book of Daniel into the book of Revelation to show the connection from the year 1844 up to the second coming. And then Revelation now can fill in all those details, because Revelation is all about the coming of the Messiah, the revealing of the Messiah. And so now we're in a much better place to understand how the book of Revelation picks up from the book of Daniel to complete this narrative, so that we can have confidence and are looking forward to an expectation of the return of Christ. And so hopefully now you're in a better position to understand Revelation as we go into the verse by verse study, to see how the foundation was laid in Daniel, how Matthew 24 bridges the gap, and how Revelation completes the narrative. I look forward to seeing you in the study. Thanks for watching.